Hello. Let's ignore the fact that I have been gone for like over 2 months. I've recorded some stuff, but I was very anxious and I found it hard to record videos and edit them because when I was editing I could tell how anxious I was, and that was even more anxiety inducing, so I ended up taking a break and I think I'm a bit better, so hi. And without further ado, let's talk about the best books I've read last year. So I have 7 books and 2 honorable mentions. Number 7 and number 1 and 2 are kind of ranked, but everything in the middle, like I could rank it differently on a different day, so everything between number 7 and number 2, those books aren't really like ranked. I like them all on a similar level. So first honorable mention we have Les Mis by Victor Hugo. Yes, I have read this break last year. I did film a vlog, but I ended up not editing it. I have like 3 hours of footage and I'm not sure if it's like a very interesting vlog anyway, so I might not post it, I don't know yet. But regardless of the rating, because I actually didn't give this book a very high rating. It's not a 5-star, it's not a 4.5 star, but it is a standout of last year. I mean, first of all, it is an achievement to finish this book. After I finished it, I found myself comparing a lot of other classics I read later to this book, and a lot of them paled in comparison. So that's when I realized, yeah, this is a great book. Like, I didn't really love it. It's not necessarily a new favorite, but is it the best classic ever written? Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, I just wanted to mention this because I do feel like it's a very important book that I read last year. And the second honorable mention is A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. This is a book about a food critic living in Boston and New York in the like 90s, early 2000s. It spans throughout a few years. We start this book with the main character writing this book from prison because she actually was a cannibal and she got caught. So that's the story. I didn't think it would be my thing, but I ended up really enjoying it. The writing style was exquisite. So many like rich descriptions of food, because she's not only a cannibal, she's a food critic, right? I give it 4 stars, but really enjoyed it, would recommend it. So when it comes to the actual ranking, on number 7 we have Flayed as It Lays by Joan Didion. This was my first Joan Didion and I'm excited to read more from her. This book follows a woman named Mariah who is in her early 30s, and this book begins with her being in a psychiatric hospital recovering from something, and the story is basically about how she got there. So we go back in time to figure out what got her there, right? It's set in the 1960s in Los Angeles, and Mariah actually used to be an actress. And yeah, we just follow her story, her marriage to her husband, who was also, I think, a director. And it did remind me a bit of The Villager, if The Villager was set in Hollywood and the main character was an actress. It has very short chapters, very spare prose, and the book is quite bleak. I would check trigger warnings before reaching for it. And yeah, it focuses on Mariah, her husband, and their friends, and it shows the kind of like utter emptiness of their life in Hollywood. So yeah, it explores the meaninglessness of life, very fun. It's definitely heavy on the nihilism. I actually read this book in a literary fiction reading blog. And in that vlog, I just kind of asked the question, like, is it really nihilism or is it just depression? And yeah, you can find out if you read this book. The reason why this book is last is because of this like specific writing style. I did feel kind of distant from the other characters because we're kind of stuck in Mariah's head. We don't really find out much about the other characters. They speak to Mariah, but aside from the dialogue, we can't really get to know them. And I don't know, maybe that's the point because we're kind of stuck in Mariah's head and she's very, very focused on herself. But I did feel a little bit of a distance there. But overall, I found 4.5 star, really excited about the future books that I'm going to read by Joan Didion. Then we have a collection of short stories called Charcoal Smile by Choi Eun-young. I can't really tell you much about this book because it is a collection of short stories, but I can tell you this collection focuses on young South Korean woman. It's a great collection and it really masterfully kind of weaves personal stories with kind of wider political or socio-economic issues. And yeah, I was surprised how in a very few pages the author could make me care about the characters. They felt very human. And yeah, it is about generational trauma, and it's probably my favorite collection of short stories I've ever read, so there's that. Then we have, where should I put it? Here, Peril at End House by Agatha Christie. This book focuses on Poirot, who goes to the Cornish countryside for a holiday. Hastings is also there, if you know, you know. And basically they meet a young woman called Nick Buckley, I think. And she tells them that recently she had like 3 different kind of close encounters with death, like near-death experiences. And, you know, Poirot decides to investigate. This was so fun. This is probably my second favorite Agatha Christie novel. I have to say I'm not a huge fan of Poirot novels overall, but in this particular one he makes some mistakes and gets humbled, and I just love to see it. And I also enjoyed Hastings' narration. Is it narration? Is he the one narrating the story? I don't know, but I just remember I really enjoyed it, like his little like jabs at Poirot, because I related to them. So really fun mystery with like just enough clues for you to like be able to put it together by yourself, but at the same time it's not super obvious, so it's a fine line to walk. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. Okay, next we have another book that I don't have physically, and it is Mrs. March by Virginia Fito. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I listened to it on audiobook, and I have to say the audiobook is the way to go. The narrator did an amazing job. Yeah, this story is about Mrs. March, who is a wife to Mr. March, obviously, who is a pretty famous writer. He just recently published a book, and people are saying this is his best one yet. And her husband are quite well off. They live in New York, and the story is set around Christmas time, New Year's, and we kind of kick off the story with Mrs. March going to like a bakery, confectionery store, something like that, and a shopkeeper tells her she read the book, the newest book that her husband wrote, and she asks Mrs. March, how does it feel to have like a main character to be like based off of her? And Mrs. March is confused because even though she hasn't read the book, she knows that the main character of that novel is a whore. This is what it's described in the book as. She's a sex worker, I guess. And like the story is that she's like ugly and unlovable and no one wants to sleep with her. So Mrs. March is quite distressed by the fact that like people think that the main character is inspired by her, and things go off from there. This is a remarkable debut, I have to say. This book is sometimes advertised as a thriller, and I'm not sure if, because of that kind of mismarketing, if it doesn't hurt the book, because it doesn't have a very high rating on Goodreads. I would say it's more of a literary psychological suspense, because like you don't get crazy twists, but it's just like a fascinating portrayal of the main character's mind and her as she kind of spirals out of control. So it's more of a character study, which is why I don't think it's really a thriller. In the beginning, I could kind of see echoes of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and maybe Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, with her because at the beginning she goes out to the shops to kind of buy things for a party, which is like a little bit of a resemblance to Mrs. Dalloway, but that was only in the beginning. This book is definitely kind of its own thing and steers off from those comparisons. Some people also mentioned Patricia Highsmith. I know she wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley. I've never read anything by Patricia Highsmith, but I don't know, maybe. It's interesting because this book is quite descriptive and very atmospheric, and I really like the prose, but at the same time I found it really hard to figure out in like what time period this was set. Like I can guess it was set in like second half of the 20th century, but I'm not sure when exactly. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting to me that it feels kind of suspended in time. And I have to say, this is how you write an unlikable character, because the main character feels so like insecure and anxious and sometimes you just see those like glimpses of things that might be very relatable, but then like 5 seconds later she does something very morally questionable and you're like, oh no, never mind, I don't relate to her. So yeah, she's unlikable but interesting, and yeah, I would definitely recommend it, especially the audiobook. Okay, then we have The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. Oh, by the way, Mrs. March I read in a reading vlog where I read like lowest rated books on my TBR. And this book I read in a historical fiction reading vlog. It feels very good to have like specific videos that I can mention where you can watch like my full thoughts on books. I don't know, for a person that does this whole thing as a hobby and isn't very consistent with uploads, it's nice to feel like I actually talked about those books before. So, The Little Stranger is a historical fiction. This book is set after the Second World War. We follow the main character, who is a doctor. He's called Dr. Faraday. He goes on like a doctor's visit to this mansion called Hundredth Hall, and he actually remembers this place from his childhood because his mother used to work there, and he visits this mansion after many years and realizes how ruined it is. And yeah, Dr. Faraday, after the first visit, kind of becomes the family friend, and this is actually kind of a ghost story. There is something going on at the Hundredth Hall, so it has a very kind of gothic atmosphere around it, and some people categorize this as horror, but I wouldn't say so. It is definitely gothic and atmospheric, but it's not very scary, to be honest. But I really enjoyed it. Like, Sarah Waters can write. Like, she's really a master in her craft. Her prose is so like rich in detail, but not overwritten, and it's so just immersive. It's very slow paced, and I did like it, but I have to say, kind of in the middle, I felt like it started dragging on a little bit, and in the end I did feel like we could lose like 100 pages and it would overall make it a better novel, but I still very much enjoyed it. It did remind me a little bit, obviously, of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and a little bit, not tonally, but more thematically, of I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith, because in I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith we also have this family living in this castle, and they used to be rich, but now they're poor, and they're living in this mansion, but it's like crumbling apart and they barely have anything to eat. And this book definitely explores this kind of changing society, and you know how a lot of kind of rich families after the Second World War had to live in those kind of conditions. And I feel like this is a good time to talk about the ending, because I have a very love-hate relationship with the ending, because I liked it as a twist, but I didn't love the implications of it. What I mean by that, I liked it as a twist, as like a reveal on a personal level, but on a more systematic level, kind of as a commentary on the British society of the 20th century, I'm not sure if I loved it. If you want more thoughts, because I did talk about the spoilers in that vlog, if you want to know exactly what didn't work for me, you can head over there. But I was very conflicted because I wasn't sure if I wasn't taking my interpretation a bit too far, and I think maybe I was, which is why I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars instead of anything lower than that, because yeah. Because while it is a ghost story, at its core it's also about kind of the collapsing kind of class system of the British society at that time, and that's very interesting. And I'm not sure if I loved where we ended up in the end with this commentary, but if you want to know more, head over to that video. Nevertheless, a great book that I really enjoyed. So now let's get to the top 2 books that I've read in 2023. On number 2 we have Arcadia by Tom Stoppard, which is a play. I don't know if this is a surprise or not. I'm not gonna lie, like the top 2 books are definitely the best books I've read last year. Like, those definitely are my 2 favorites, and I will get to why this is number 2 later. But first things first, what this play is about. It's kind of hard to explain, but this play follows kind of 2 time periods. The first time period is set in the like early 19th century, and we have a young girl, I think she's 13 or something like that, called Thomasina, who is very smart. She has a lot of interest in like mathematics, physics, nature, stuff like that. And also we have her tutor, Septimus Hodge. Then in the modern day, which like I'm guessing is like the 1990s, because that's when this play was published, we have two academics, Hannah Jarvis and Bernard Nightingale, who are in the same place. They're both set in the like English countryside. So both kind of timelines or time periods are set in the same place, and the modern day time period is about those two academics researching the 19th century period. Because they think that at that time when Thomasina and her tutor were living there, they think Lord Byron also visited the house. Lord Byron, the famous poet. And they're just trying to figure out what happened there. This is going to be hard. This book and the next one, I will have a difficult time explaining why I love it, but this play is about everything. This book talks about the relation between science and nature. It talks about history and how biographies are just an interpretation of events of the past and how a lot of them can be inaccurate. It talks about literary criticism, but it also talks about human desire and how throughout the centuries the world changes, but we as humans don't, and we're still looking for the same answers. But also at its center it has something called chaos theory, which like basically talks about how there's this like apparent like randomness and like disorder in the universe, but there are still some like underlying patterns and things that repeat. And I just love that this book focuses on like two female scholars. Like Thomasina obviously is just a girl, but she's very smart. She has a lot of like theories and ideas about a lot of different like scientific disciplines, and then we have the present timeline with Hannah, and it's about women in STEM. Okay, and to me it's amazing because I hope I'm not putting you off of this book, because like it does talk about many academic things, but to me it's still quite accessible and it's surprisingly unpretentious. The reason why it is unpretentious is because of the characters. They're very human. They have like very witty banter between each other. There's this lightness of tone. They like curse, they make sex jokes, and I just love this representation of like academics being regular people. And it's amazing how a play that has so much science in it also has so much heart. So I'm not sure if I sold you on this, but yeah, it might be one of my favorite plays of all time. That being said, the reason why I put this on number 2 is because of the ending, and it is a little bit problematic. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, obviously, because I don't want to spoil it, but I'm a bit torn when it comes to the ending, because it does make a point. Like, it does play into kind of the chaos theory, and like it does come out of the left field, and that it's supposed to do that, but I was still uncomfortable with what happened. So, do I think Tom Stoppard could have made the same point without being so problematic? Probably, but still a favorite. And on number 1 we have Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I'm not sure how to talk about this book because it feels very personal, but this book is about Martha, who recently separated from her husband, and we go back in time to her childhood, teenage years, and follow her throughout her life to figure out what got her to that point. I have cried many times reading this book. I have laughed. It is very quick, witty, funny, but also heart-wrenching, and Meg Mason just walks that line perfectly. It has a lot of memorable characters, very well fleshed out, and it's about mental illness. It's about the importance of having the correct diagnosis, which is interesting because the main character's diagnosis is never actually named in the book. And I know this is a controversial thing about this book. Some people don't like it, but I personally love that choice because I think it shifts the conversation around this book, because it's not a book about a person with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or depression. It's about the person with mental illness and how that mental illness influences every aspect of her life and her family's life. But at the same time, it's not who she is as a person. and it doesn't define her. You know, like I feel like the fact that the author decided not to name her mental illness was a really great choice, because it shouldn't define her. And yeah, I don't have much more to say about it. This book was quite popular, not last year, in 2022, because it was nominated for Women's Prize for Fiction. So I'm a bit late to, you know, singing its praises, but I'm really glad I got to it. And if you feel up to it, because obviously it talks about some difficult topics, I think it's an important read. Even if you personally don't struggle with mental illness, or especially if you don't struggle with a mental illness, I think it is a great portrayal of how it can affect a person and the people close to them. So that's everything. Do tell me if I convinced you to read any of those books. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!